Now, Diane Abbott may have had the Labour whip restored, but the Times is reporting that she will not be allowed to stand as a candidate for the party at the general election. She was suspended last April after suggesting Jewish, Irish and traveller people were not subject to the same levels of racism as other minorities. Labour sources have told the paper that while Diane Abbott has been readmitted as an MP, she will not be endorsed as a candidate by Labour's National Executive Committee, and that could spell the end of her 37-year career in Parliament. Well, we're joined now by Hillary Schan, who's independent and former Labour councillor in Worthing and a former co-chair of Momentum. Good morning, Hillary.
Hi, Kate. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Just can I get your reaction to Diane Abbott not being able to stand, which is what we understand is going to happen next?
Yeah, I mean, it's completely shocking. This is a woman that was elected as the first Black woman MP, has been a stalwart of the Labour movement, of the anti-racist movement. She is now a Labour MP once again and has been selected by her local members with an overwhelming majority. And so there is no reason that she should not be allowed to stand as a Labour candidate.
So in your view, has she been treated fairly or unfairly by the party?
Absolutely unfairly. When you look at similar cases where white male MPs have been accused of anti-Semitic comments, such as Barry Shearman and Steve Reed, they didn't even get a suspension, let alone the months and months of waiting in limbo that Diane has had to put up with. If you look at Neil Coyle, who made racist comments to a journalist, had a sexual harassment complaint upheld against him, and he was restored the whip, whereas Diane has had to wait for months in limbo. And now we find out that actually this was concluded 5 months ago, and that Keir Starmer has been lying in public, saying that this was an ongoing and independent process, when in actual fact it was within his power to restore the whip at any time.
I mean, have you had chance to speak to Diane Abbott? Do you understand, because obviously lots of people have been trying to, but as yet we haven't heard from Diane Abbott formally on what's happened here. Do we understand, do you know why this process seems to have stalled? Why it seems to be that we were all told, actually, that it was ongoing, even as recently as this month, and it seems that it has been concluded some time ago?
I haven't spoken with Diane, but I think it's very clear to everybody exactly why this has been stalled. This is just another example of Keir Starmer's factional game playing, lying in public. It's clear that his word can never be trusted. I think this is even worse than most activists even feared, the fact that it was actually concluded months ago. And as I said, it's just another example of Keir Starmer's factional game playing. And this time, it has the first Black woman MP elected to Parliament as the victim. It's absolutely abhorrent.
I mean, some people might say that just because you've stood for the Labour Party for a long time, you've been a trailblazer, and nobody would deny that Diane Abbott has been a trailblazer. For Black and minority ethnic women in Parliament, she has campaigned long and hard in her 37-year career. But some people might say, look, just because of those things, it doesn't mean that you get to repeatedly stand for Labour if you have had to go on anti-Semitism training, if you've sort of faced these accusations in the past, that it is for the party to decide who it wants to stand and represent it at general elections.
Well, that case might hold up if it was consistently applied. But as I've said, you've seen multiple cases, and in many cases, as I said, white men, which makes this look incredibly targeted towards a Black woman MP.
You think that's what this is? You think it? I mean, that would suggest you think it's racism.
I absolutely do think it's racism. As I said, he has singled out the first Black woman MP and treated her differently to white MPs who've made similar comments. It's very hard to draw any other conclusion from this. And so the rules are not applied consistently across the board. And what does it say about Labour Party values if, as you say, a trailblazer like Diane Abbott, who has spent years and years fighting anti-racism, fighting for her constituents, isn't allowed in, and yet somebody like Natalie Elphicke, who has made disgusting anti-migrant comments, made those comments about Marcus Rashford, tried to defend her sex offender husband, is allowed to walk into the Labour Party and be welcomed with
Yeah.
open.
Natalie Elphicke, of course, the defector. Just finally, Hillary Schan, before we let you go, you obviously are an independent now, former Labour councillor. What was it that made you turn away from the Labour Party yourself?
It was a really difficult decision, but the last 6 months have been intolerable within the Labour Party, particularly Keir Starmer's stance on Gaza. from when he made those comments on LBC around Israel having the right to withhold aid and water and food from Palestine, but also just his U-turn after U-turn. As I said, this man seems incapable of honesty. And for a man that is now looking to be coronated as the next prime minister, I think it's a huge issue that this man seems to be completely untrustworthy, and his word seems to mean nothing.
Hillary Schan, independent and former Labour councillor in Worthing and former co-chair of Momentum. Thanks for your time this morning. Pleased to say that we do now have Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, joining us on the programme. Good morning.
Morning, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Now, I know that you are putting the NHS front and centre today. You're announcing plans on waiting list targets, and I want to come to all of that. But there is some other news, of course, this morning around about Diane Abbott, the veteran Labour MP. She's had the whip restored by the party, but she has confirmed to us this morning, Wes Streeting, that she is being barred from standing for Labour in this election. Why is that?
Well, I'm not aware of the circumstances. I know that Diane had the whip restored and her suspension lifted yesterday. This was following her suspension over remarks that she made, for which she later apologised. So I know at this stage, in terms of decisions about her candidature, as much as has been reported, what I'm interested in and concerned about are the 8 million people who've been waiting on NHS waiting lists, and the risk of that rising potentially to 10 million if Rishi Sunak is given the keys to number 10 again.
And I will come on to that, but I do just want to ask you again. I mean, Diane Abbott has said that you're right, she's been given the whip back, but she is barred from standing for Labour. There are some quite serious questions about the process here. She was asked to do an anti-Semitism awareness course, which she completed in February. As early as recently as a couple of weeks ago, we were told that process was still ongoing. It turns out now that was not correct. It feels like something has gone wrong here with the process around Diane Abbott. She's not been treated particularly well by the party. Would you agree with that?
Well, I'm not responsible for the process. It's independent of politicians. What I am responsible for is Labour's position on the NHS.
Do you feel comfortable with it, though, Wes Streeting? Do you feel comfortable about what's happened here with Diane Abbott?
No, not particularly. I think this has gone on for a very long time. But, I'm here this morning to talk about the NHS waiting lists and what we do about them.
Do you think she's owed?
Do you think? And I say this with enormous respect for everything that Diane has achieved in politics, and I have a great deal of respect for what she's achieved in politics, actually. This election is about the future of our entire country, the 7.5 million people who are on NHS waiting lists, and the risk of giving the matches back to the arsonists who have led the NHS to the worst crisis in its history.
And we will come on to talk about that at length. I want to ask you finally, do you think Diane Abbott is owed an apology by the Labour Party?
Well, Diane rightly apologised for the comments that she made that led to her suspension. As to the process, I think those questions are better directed to people responsible for the process. And I think it's best that we wait for all of the facts to emerge about the decision-making in this case, which I've not been involved in, have no responsibility for. And I'm here to talk about the 7.5 million people who are on NHS waiting lists, and the fact that those waiting lists are likely to rise to as high as 10 million if the Conservatives are given the keys to number 10 again.
Let's talk about that then.